Hello and welcome back to Critical Thinking. And this week and next week in Modules 2 and 3, we will be looking at argumentation and critical thinking. So, what is an argument? Is it people yelling at each other, shouting past each other, trying to make their point made? No, it's actually something quite different. It's a civil and friendly or amicable way of reaching a sound decision with another person. You can do that even with yourself, deciding to do something. So you lay out the argument, you look at it from different points of view, and you come up with a decision. So good arguments are different from bad arguments, where there is no degree of persuasion, there's no degree of a goal being sort of kept in mind, it's just people shouting. So we don't want to do this. Instead, we wish to engage with another person in a cooperative kind of way. We don't want to coerce or browbeat people into agreeing with you, but instead you want to enlist their help. You want to find some kind of common ground that will help you to come up with a reasonable solution to a shared problem, right? Not just one of your own, but a shared problem. That what that means is it also it will affect or influence in some degree the listener. So when we argue, we don't try to attack or to pander. We wish to persuade. That's what I'm trying to do. So these days, we have a lot of argumentation, I should say, on TV and between individuals about political issues. And argumentation is not just about that. It's about a whole range of things. But what we're going to try to do is present our evidence, scientific or otherwise, but we're going to move that evidence and shape it in such a way that it presents our point of view in a persuasive manner. So the other person can look at it, think about it, consider it, and then come up with a counter argument, not necessarily a counter attack, but a counter argument. And this is essentially how argumentation moves back and forth between speaker and listener. So try to think not of having arguments with enemies as much as trying to make allies with another person. And of course, the talk down south of the border about unity and trying to overcome division, that's essentially what people are saying. Now, how successful they're going to be, that's up to them. But this is what we're trying to do is to make allies with other people through argumentation, showing our point of view, and hopefully showing it in such a way, in a persuasive way, that they will believe what you're saying and go, yeah, I see what you're saying. I see your point of view. That's the first step. So arguments so pervade our thinking and our way of thinking that ultimately we kind of lose sight of what argumentation is. And what it is, a couple things. One, it tries to convince others to think the way that you do. And again, you're going to persuade them, not browbeat them or coerce them or threaten them, but persuade them through language. And two, to decide even for ourselves what we should think or do about something. So argumentation is not just between two individuals. It can be just within one person. So ultimately, the key idea here is convincing, right? Through persuasion, convincing yourself or convincing another person. So if you're thinking critically, you're trying to develop and test and question an idea, look at it from a variety of points of view, and see how it will affect yourself in choosing one path versus another, or if you're speaking to someone else, to do the same thing. Because at the end of the day, you wish to find that common ground. So through argument, we can make our thinking clear, we can reflect on our experiences and our beliefs, and we can also respond to others and their belief system. So we need to make sure we can do that as well. So the only way to do this properly is to think critically and speak clearly. So everyone is on board as to what it is that is being discussed. And if you do that, you are considered to be thinking rationally. And that's ultimately what we want to do. But that's not something that can be done overnight. It takes a period of time. It takes a degree of maturity and wisdom and intelligence to think critically about the position that another person is presenting to you and discuss, argue back and forth about the merits of that position before deciding that you want to either throw it out and present your own or find some part of that argument that is valid to pursue further. But what you're doing is through maturity and wisdom and some degree of intelligence and objectivity too, because that is important. We need to be able to not only question our own thinking, but certainly the thinking of another person. And as those critical faculties mature, right, we can learn that like others, we don't just accept claims and reasons without testing them, without looking at the evidence that supports those ideas. And if we don't have that, we shouldn't accept it. We shouldn't follow through with what it is that a person is trying to tell us. So where our ability to think critically really matters is being able to sit down and objectively look at the information that we have. So information by way of evidence, or at least some substantiated claims about that certain position that we can now sort of weigh and think about and look at from a variety of different perspectives. So we're looking at things intellectually. We're not screaming at anybody, least of all ourselves if we're trying to figure out something for ourselves, but we're going to question that which we believe. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being a critical thinker towards oneself, because we have to have that sense of self-control to slow down our capacity to sort of jump to conclusions, like literally to jump, or at least to slow down our way of thinking so that we can take the time to examine using reason why it is that we believe something. And if we can investigate it a little bit further, why those claims are valid, we're more likely to make a more sound decision concerning what it is that we're considering, what we're thinking about. So if we can do that, can we identify what we mean by thinking critically in this particular capacity? Well, yes, we can. So if we can be patient, we can be skeptical, and we can be logical, it's likely that we're going to come up with a fairly good solution to our dilemma as we sort of argue with either ourselves or with other people. So you need to have the patience to gather all the information that you require to make a sound decision. And this could be either the experiences that you've had or experiences of another person that you trust. It could be direct observation, or it could be observation from another person that, again, you trust, right? You make sure your sources are good, or the research that you've done. And again, it's right there. Just going on YouTube and looking at one video does not make you a researcher. It just makes you someone who watches YouTube videos and, unblindingly and uncritically accepting that person's opinion. So let's have the patience to just do the work. And depending how serious this issue is, maybe more patience and a bit more work is required. So along with patience, skepticism, right? Not to accept that information at face value. How much do you trust your friend? How much do you believe what they say? If you do, then clearly this is a person with some degree of wisdom and experience that you can rely on when you're making a decision based on something. But you want to keep a degree of skepticism and make sure that you can trust that person. And finally, the last thing is the logical ability to use those facts and that evidence in a way that helps you to persuade either another person of your point of view or to persuade yourself that this is in fact the right thing to do. So to be fully rational, you want to be able to do four things here. You want to be able to seek out those facts that both contradict but also confirm what you're thinking. And what I mean by that is cast the net wide open, right? Keep that net wide open and say, sure, I'm going to find the facts that confirm what I know. But the more difficult thing is to find facts that contradict your point of view. And this is something a lot of people either don't like doing or forget to do. But if you are going to seek out facts, you need to be able to find the ones that confirm or deny your point of view. And if they deny your point of view, you need to be able to ask yourself why that is. Does that point that contradicts your position, what is it about that fact that contradicts your idea? Is there some validity to what's being discussed here? Or is it just someone simply saying, no, I don't believe it? Because that's not a fact. That's now an opinion, right? So seek out actual facts and look at enough of them, and just don't find the ones that confirm what you believe in and dismiss the rest. you're doing a great disservice to yourself and being somewhat unethical if you only look for the facts that confirm what you believe in. If you find the ones that contradict your belief system and you can address them, that makes you a much better critical thinker. 2, as well as being able to seek out facts that can contradict or confirm what you think, be willing to change your mind. Right? Be willing to change your mind and change your beliefs. Because if you find those facts and you find enough that contradict what you're saying, then you should be at least willing to entertain those ideas and be able to change your mind. Because if not, then you are resisting information that is clearly productive to coming up with a different version of what you think is right. So along with those two, you also want to be able to imagine alternative ways of thinking, right? This is the typical thinking outside the box. Until someone comes up with a better metaphor, let's stick with that one. But imagining other ways, alternative ways of thinking about the problem, looking at the problem from a different perspective, asking someone with a different worldview to come in and participate in the discussion. Because the more voices you have addressing the same problem, the better chance you have of someone coming up with a unique perspective. That at that point, if you have that, then you seek out those facts, and if they are valid and they may contradict what you initially thought, then be willing to change your mind. And also too, while you're doing all of this, ask yourself, about assumptions that you make, because we need to be able to recognize those blind spots in our ability to argue with another person, because we make an awful lot of assumptions about what is right, or what we think is right. So we need to be able to identify and then question those assumptions, have them confirmed or have them denied. And you do that by seeking out those facts. There may be inconsistencies in your thinking. Ask yourself why that is. Or at worst, out and out contradictions with the way that you're thinking. So you need to be able to identify those and deal with them. So the best way to complete an argument is to think about the following 3 things. Slow down a little bit. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't block another person's, sort of alternative position. Leave yourself open to be able to consider these alternative viewpoints, but slow down that process, even just a little bit, so that you can consider and then reconsider the position that you have, that you're maintaining, the facts that you have to support that position, or the ones you now encounter as you do that objective research that may contradict what you're thinking. So when you slow down and look at all the evidence, make sure that you can line it up with your point of view, your worldview, and if not, ask yourself why. So that's kind of a mental checklist that you can use, and it's a way in which you can consider the issues at hand, because when you construct that argument, all of these things matter, right? They allow us the benefit of interacting with others because we've done the work. We've been able to sit down and say, look, I've given this a lot of thought. Now, that doesn't mean I watched one YouTube video and it confirmed what I believed. That's not the same as I gave it a lot of thought. I don't care if the video is 45 minutes long. You haven't considered alternative points of view. You've simply watched something and it confirmed what you already believe. So if you can do this, you have a better likelihood of interacting positively with other people, or at least interacting positively with a thought, an assumption you have. Because without that, without the mental flexibility, you will not be able to think critically, at least to the degree that you should, as opposed to the degree that you are in fact doing that. So if you were to kind of draw out, if you wanted to have a graph of, or a graph of something you're doing, it looks something like this. So number 1, you identify an assumption and you go, okay, I believe that, the earth is flat. Let's go for something wacky, which to some people isn't. We're living in a world where some people think the earth is flat. Every other globe around the solar system is round, but somehow earth is flat. So go figure. So let's say that's the assumption. So identify the assumption. I think the world is flat. Okay, 2, check for accuracy and validity. That doesn't mean go on YouTube and watch videos about the Flat Earth Society. Sure, you can do that to confirm what you believe, but how about alternative viewpoints? Let's say from geographers, astronauts, people like, airline pilots that travel around the globe. So the accuracy and validity of what they have to say may be of sort of greater importance than someone that simply wants to believe that they're thinking independently. Check your sources. Don't be a sheep. Okay, that's fine. No one's asking you to be a sheep. But if you have more evidence that contradicts what you're thinking than what you believe in, you're either living in an echo chamber or you simply refuse to look at valid and accurate facts, right, that are brought to you by people that should know. So if that's the case, if you find something that sort of questions your assumption and you found valid and accurate material, then you take the third step, which is to consider at least an alternative perspective. Maybe the earth is round, or maybe it's not round. Maybe it's some kind of weird spheroid. Maybe it's almost kind of oval, or maybe kind of a stretched out circle. I don't care. Whatever it is, you're thinking now in some kind of alternative way. And so that alternative perspective is one that you should still take critically, right? You don't want to endorse something that is the exact opposite and not think critically about it. So once you do those things, then at that point you can take informed action and start to talk to people who are also level-headed that, that the earth is in fact closer to something that resembles a circle than a flat disk. Okay, so I know it's a stupid example, but it's one that some people actually believe. So lots of people believe lots of weird other things, but it's one that is almost laughable, but it isn't, because there are still people that think this way. And they are somehow able to push out of their minds very persuasive evidence to the contrary. And these are the kinds of people that you'll sometimes experience or encounter and go, nope, it's this. And they steadfastly refuse to hear anything else. Well, you've lost the argument, because there is no argument. There's no discussion. There's no persuading. There's no considering alternatives. All the things we've talked about so far. So when we use argumentation to think critically, what we're doing is we're testing old ideas and confirming that they are in fact correct. And these may include assumptions, but ideas are a little bit stronger. And then developing new ones in sort of, these different stages that I've just presented to you, these different levels. So these stages can become increasingly difficult because the degree of questioning becomes more difficult. And it's not just about what you think, but what you are basing your thinking on in the first place. Where are you getting your information? Where do you find similar ideas? Or by the same token, dissimilar ideas? So the three sort of main approaches to argumentation are the following. So you can ask yourself, first of all, is the idea or plan supportable? In other words, can it be backed up with facts, right? Is it an objective, verifiable scientific fact? Or does it kind of fall in the other category of an opinion, an insight, an intuition, or a hunch about something? I mean, you can start with one of those. You can have an opinion or an intuition about something, but you have to pursue it further, right? You have to go much further and find information, find facts that confirm it. So is your plan or your idea supportable? Yes or no? Yes with facts. No, it's just an opinion, and I'm just kind of starting out, right? It's a first draft. 2, is the belief in your idea or plan defensible? Okay, much like the first one, is it supportable? Is it defensible with objective facts? Are there supporting reasons that we can now draw up and call up that will support what we think and say? And of course, that applies to the other person. You can knock down another person's argument quite easily if they have no supporting evidence. It's not even defensible. In your mind, you say, look, this is laughable, but you can't just laugh at a person. You have to persuade them that what they're saying is wrong. And then finally, is the belief in the plan logical? Does it use or require some degree of reason to understand it? Or is it just emotional, button pushing? Because quite often that's what passes for arguments these days, especially over the last 4 years with the kind of right-wing lunacy that we've had literally around the world, not just the US, but around the world. That's kind of where it is. It's not supportable. It's not defensible. It's definitely not logical, but it pushes buttons. And what these arguments do is push the right buttons. And people, when their emotional buttons are pushed, aren't thinking clearly. And this is the reason why they become very persuasive, because people stop thinking critically and respond emotionally. And when that happens, you've lost science, you've lost reason, you've lost logic. And you need to be very careful when you make an argument that is based purely on emotional button pushing, because that can be knocked down very quickly. Get your facts. Get the facts you need to support your position. So you can ask yourself, can I support my ideas with reason and with facts? If the answer is yes, you're well on your way. Can I show that I've considered all other relevant views and alternatives? That's also important. Like I mentioned earlier, if some of the facts contradict your position, think about them just as clearly as the ones that support your argument. So if you are going to look at alternative viewpoints, contradictory viewpoints, you need to also do it objectively. And you need to do it in such a way that you are at least honest with that other opinion. You can't kind of cherry pick parts of it that help to confirm your position. That other viewpoint may be really solid, and you have one of two choices. You either ignore it outright and hope that the person that you're arguing with isn't aware of that other argument, or you can sort of look at it in such a way and say, well, I really don't know how to respond to this. I need to sort of give it more thought. In other words, slow down that thinking process, right? Don't jump to conclusion. So you need to figure out, how will I deal with these alternatives? If you've considered them, yes, it is possible that there may be one or two that are really solid, and you need to work through these. Either hold off on the arguing, or at least present it and say, we need to deal with this. This is something that is, a clear issue that we need to go back and address. But with the exception of this, here's where we're at. Because if you don't present or acknowledge those alternatives, that's being unethical, because you're not thinking critically in a way that presents these alternative viewpoints in a satisfactory way, at least in a reasonable way. If you ignore them altogether, it's either because you don't even know they exist, or you've chosen to ignore them. Either way, that's not a good argumentation. And finally, can I explain my principles of reasoning? Can I explain to someone why I think this way, other than, well, because it's what I like, or it fits, it fits the problem? Well, it's got to be more than that. So if we are arguing with either ourselves or with someone else, we need to be able to make a good argument to both parties, yourself or the other individual. And we can also develop a kind of attitude to the other person where we can at least listen to them objectively. We don't have screaming voices inside our head going, you're wrong, you're wrong. No, we need to listen to that other person very carefully. And if we can do that, we can separate out the ideas that we both agree with, and then deal after the fact with the ones that we agree with less. And finally, we are able to state those ideas clearly and decide, okay, how much common ground do we have here? Yes, we all live on planet Earth. We all obey the laws of gravity. That's all fine and good, but we still need to take it further. So if we can do these things and we can develop this attitude and maintain that attitude, like the likelihood is we will be able to argue much more effectively. So if we are going to consider ourselves to be a member of this, community of critical thinkers, we need to be able to not only think critically, but also, using language, explain our way of thinking. Explain to people why we think the way we do. It's one thing to use facts, but how do we now sort of harness up or, hitch up our facts to our position? Well, if you are gifted in language and you think through this problem, then you will be able to explain your reasoning without a whole lot of trouble. It becomes pretty straightforward and logical to the person listening, or to yourself, if it's something you're trying to work out for yourself, that this is the right way to go. Your ability to explain it to yourself or to someone else makes sense. It uses reason. And if it can use reason, the likelihood is that it's a fairly, robust and sustained argument. Now, the problem is with a lot of things that are political, we cannot always reach consensus and agreement. So in a community where there is dissent and division, we need to be even more open to that other person, as hard as that may be, because these days politics can be deadly. Politics can be dangerous. And if that is the case, it's even more difficult to maintain that positive attitude, that open, objective attitude to the other that does not agree with you. So I'm not saying this is easy. So at times it can be very difficult. It can be almost useless, but we have to, because if we cannot reach agreement in this so-called rational community, which is society, that's the way philosophers would look at it. Communities are rational, or societies are rational communities. We still need that cooperation. We need to still work together, because at the end of the day, we're all sharing the same community. And if that's the only common ground we can find, at least it's a start. Because we can't turn around and simply dismiss what another person says as opinion when they have their own facts, or some kind of ridiculous nonsense when they have facts, or they may think they have facts. That's where at least you can begin to kind of work with them, work with that individual, and get them to see that maybe the facts are kind of questionable. Maybe they're not the way in which you should support your agreement, your argument. So we need to be very careful of that. So if we can argue, and we can do it fairly and persuasively, then we can keep that rational community going. It's when that breaks down and we just are busy screaming and yelling at each other that we have what we saw last week, which is people literally on a rampage because they perceive something to be a great injustice, and the end result is there's no cooperation. There's no rationality left anywhere or anymore. So when we are in a community where we have people with different political viewpoints, different cultural backgrounds, coming from different social classes, clearly all of those things are going to matter to a great degree what that person believes in. And we have to be open to that. So claims that seem reasonable to those from one background may appear irrational to another, not because they disagree about the facts, but because they base those claims on incompatible values, right? And incompatible principles of reasoning. So what we need to be careful of is just either name calling or attacking the person rather than the idea. And again, like I said a moment ago, it isn't easy. Right now, there's a lot at stake. We literally have people that have been living in an alternative bubble for the last 4 years, being spoon-fed lies and disinformation. Now, what am I doing? Right? I'm attacking the person. So what I am doing is saying, okay, well, this is the situation why these people believe the things that they do. Does this mean I think they're wholly beyond redemption? No. It wouldn't be easier to talk to these people right now, but what they need to figure out is, I've been lied to. And I know that you've been lied to. Oh, okay, then the lie, which they think that I'm spewing, and yet I'm saying that they're willingly, believing in, that's something we could start arguing about, or at least discussing, right? Arguing has this negative connotation, but let's say discussing. So we need to make sure that those claims that they make are reasonable right across the board, because again, we share in that rational community all together. So if cooperative agreements, right, agreement between individuals can settle these kinds of issues, we can at least help understand why not. Why is it that these people think the way they do? So if we can reach that second or third stage of critical thinking and ask ourselves, is my idea logical? Is it supportable? Is it reasonable? Is it based on facts? All these things are going to help to make a much more solid argument, either with yourself or with the other person. So we need to be able to be aware of diverse value systems that exist within that rational community. We need to be able to at least entertain different positions. And when we're talking politics, we can still respectfully agree to disagree, but even that's not possible these days. When fully one half of the population, when we talk in the States, absolutely believe that the election's been rigged and it's been nothing but a huge fraud, that's an uphill battle. It's going to be a very uphill battle and very difficult. So this is almost a society within another society. And it is no longer a rational community. It is a community that tries to look at objective facts, and in another one that's been spoon-fed information from very specific sources to help to maintain this world of disinformation. So we need to be able to be careful and also be aware that this is happening and have the tools to be able to counter it and say, well, where are we going to start, right? We need to be able to do this. So if we are going to do that, right, we must make arguments that address the problems that can be solved only if someone can do something. So if that person can, at the very least, change their minds. We're not asking, okay, from now on, you can't vote for your political party ever again. No, that's not the solution. The solution is to at least agree that this is what's happened over a period of time, or this is the reason why you think the way that the world is unfolding, or that the earth is not flat after all, whatever it may be. So we need to be able to better understand each other, and being a good listener goes a long way, but that's also on both sides. But whatever the problem is, we need to be able to convince people that a state of affairs is in fact the right way to go. And as it shows here in the slide, something as simple something as simple as convincing someone that a smoke detector in your house is useful. People that are not well off look at that as an investment, that may cost them a lot of money and they don't see any use for it. So you need to persuade them that, hey, no, you know what? A smoke alarm is the least of your worries, because if you think that you're spending a lot of money now, guess what? You don't have insurance in your house because you just told me that you're not exactly wealthy and you're trying to save some money. What if your house burns down? Then what? You've got nothing. So at the very least, have a smoke detector. So, it's a very quick argument I've just made about something as simple as having a smoke detector in your house, but you will always end up meeting people that need to be convinced of something, and they will put up all kinds of arguments against it. So you need to be able to persuade. You don't want to punch through and overwhelm them and coerce them. Persuade them. Get them to see that your point of view is the correct one. So whether a researcher poses a practical or conceptual problem, they have to be able to support that solution with arguments that others in your own community can reflect upon, test, improve, and ultimately be able to accept it. So living in this rational community that is glued together with language and words and speech, that's really ultimately the only tools we have. We can't pummel someone into believing our point of view. Although let's face it, some people have tried to do exactly that when it comes to politics. But we can't do this. We have to be able to speak to other people and speak to them in a kind of way that the words and the language and the rhetorical devices and the metaphors and allusions and all these kinds of things are agreed to in a community. So we need to be able to do that and allow that person to either leave and come back later, or to sit for a moment and reflect on what's been said. And if we can do it in a manner that is conducive to the use of speech in everyday words, even to a degree of knowledge that isn't required, like with a PhD, it's pretty straightforward. The likelihood is you're going to get that person convinced. But depending on what it is, it may not always be easy. So an argument, we've just tried to describe now over the last half hour or so what it is, but also let's take a step back and see what is not an argument. Clearly yelling and shouting at someone and threatening them, coercing them, browbeating them, that's not an argument. So argument and persuasion are not exactly the same thing, because you can make a successful argument without fully persuading the readers. There are also forms of persuasion that don't fit into the criteria of critical arguments. So persuasion, I can persuade you to buy something, but I could also be able to argue with you in a way that makes you change your mind about something. So persuasion can take a variety of forms. Advertisement is essentially persuasion, because they're trying to persuade you that, one, you're missing this thing in your life, two, that you should desire this thing, and three, here's where you can buy it. So that's persuasion to simply fill someone else's pockets. So argument is trying to achieve some kind of consensus about a point of view, trying to get someone else to understand what you're saying. So when you look at what is not an argument, you're looking at a variety of things: negotiating, propaganda, coercion, So negotiation here, offer any reason you want, everyone that would not otherwise accept, as long as we reach an outcome that we can both live with. So what you're doing here is you're basically kind of watering down the importance of the argument and just going, okay, look, whatever it's going to take to get you to shut up, I'll agree to. Is that a good argument? No. It's one that kind of fell apart, and either one or both parties just kind of gave up, said, okay, look, whatever we accept, just let's either agree to disagree, or let's try to reach an outcome that that is going to affect us the least. Well, that's negotiating. What's the thing that's going to hurt the least? That's not good argumentation. 2, propaganda, right? Offering all kinds of reasons in terms of what propagandists do, that they're going to somehow what you are presenting to them is going to benefit them in some way, or vice versa. So to propagandize to people is not using reason. It's, again, persuasion that is usually underhanded. And finally, the third one, which is pretty overt, is coercion, right? Any kind of authority that tries to coerce, or sometimes people get shamed into believing something, that's not argumentation. That's not being reasonable or logical or using verifiable scientific facts. You're coercing someone, right? You're literally holding a megaphone to their head and screaming at them and saying, believe this. No, that's not the way it works. So if you're going to argue properly, critically, persuasively, and effectively, you have to do 2 things. Right? You have to have, first of all, a claim, and that is a statement saying that what we want someone to believe or do. Now remember, an argument can be one of 2 things: change someone's mind or change their behavior. Yes, I'm going to buy that smoke detector because after what you told me, it makes sense. Or yes, I'm going to no longer believe that the earth is flat because of what you've told me. So you've made a claim, and that claim is something that's going to change that person's mind or change their behavior. And at least with the claim, one good reason why they should. And that good reason is often, held up and supported with factual evidence. And the second is the intention. So the intention that the other person will accept your claim only if you give them good reasons to do so. Threatening them, coercing them that may be an immediately good reason because you fear for your life or fear for your physical safety. But that doesn't solve the issue, does it? It just means that I go away, intact, and then now I've got to figure out what to do tomorrow when you come back and try to coerce me again. So the intention that the other person will accept your claim has to be done with good reasons. You are going to persuade them using reason that your position is the right one and theirs is less right, if not completely wrong. But either way, there has to be an intention that is supported with reason. And so for an exchange to be a thoughtful argument, the way that I've described it kind of in a perfect world, one based on all 3 stages of critical thinking, as I've pointed out, it has to be more than simply a one-sided offer for reason, right? We need to make it sound, and we need to make it fair, because we need to make that other person understand that we have listened to them. We have considered what they've had to say. We've listened to what their position is in terms of the facts they have brought to the table. And so if we can do that, we now make that person understand that we listened to them, it was sound, and it was fair, because we considered all the things that were brought to the table, both for and against the position that I'm trying to argue or that they're trying to argue. And we can acknowledge and respond to those views that might qualify or contradict our own. So ultimately, if that's the case, both parties hopefully will have learned something, because the one will listen to the other and consider the alternative viewpoints, and together both individuals will, I would hope, feel richer as a result of the experience. So that's part 1 of argumentation. And I know my examples were not the best. They're the first thing that popped in my head. But we'll talk again on, I believe, on Thursday at noon. We're going to sort of go into this in a bit more detail. But certainly, if you have any questions about it, bring them or email them to me. And again, this is just reading through the material, sort of basic ideas about argumentation and what makes a good argument, a thoughtful argument. And also when we meet on Thursday, I will have some information on the sort of at-home assignment, and I believe there is what would have been an in-class quiz, but in this case it also will be an at-home quiz, but we'll talk more about that on Thursday. So in the meantime, take care, and we'll see each other.